Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Awaken Your Soul's Journey podcast. I'm Angela, and I am delighted to have with me Allison Stieger. And Allison is an acclaimed expert on the topic of mythology, storytelling, and personal transformation through narrative shaping. And she holds a master's degree in mythological studies from Pacifica Graduate Institute and has more than 20 years of experience at Mythic Stories LLC, working with individuals of all ages and from all walks of life on crafting the narrative structure of their lives using powerful, life-changing lessons from myths the world over. So thank you, Allison, for taking the time today. And thank you for sharing with us this whole new topic that I haven't explored. And I'm super excited to see how this can help us as we're going through the grieving process and to just maybe understand better, because I just from the little bit of talking we just did, I think there's a lot of things that we can relate to with these stories that can help us move through. So I'm excited to dive into all of it. But first, maybe tell everybody how you ended up doing what you do.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. And, stories have been something that interested me for a really long time. I had an interesting childhood. I was raised in Alaska, and my dad was this wonderful storyteller. He was a bush pilot. He was a great adventurer, and he loved to tell stories. And my mother was a reader, and she taught me to read when I was really little. And so I had stories kind of coming at me from the books that I was reading. So I got really interested early on in understanding the power that these stories had over me. I mean, they were comforting me in times of distress. They were really helping me navigate the world outside the bounds of the family that I was in. It really showed me a way to understand other ways of living, right? So I didn't have to only know the life that I had in Alaska. And I got really, really interested in English literature. I wanted to know what life was like. I mean, Alaska is a very kind of hyper-specific way to grow up. It's very unusual, and to see the world, and it's kind of isolated too, right? So to be
Wow.
able to see the world through stories in books that I was reading was really important to me. And as I grew older, I was really interested in how is this happening? Like, what is it about these things that we tell each other that enraptures us so much as human beings? And then I came to learn later, that we really do understand the world through storytelling. Like, if you want to communicate a piece of information to another human being, the very best way to do that is to tell them a story. And I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting where someone's put up a PowerPoint presentation that's full of really dry data, but it takes about 20 seconds for you to
Yeah.
start taking a nap inside your own mind, at least, right? So it's really not an effective way to communicate. But if you can couch it in the form of a story, that's a really powerful way to get through to people. And I was figuring out what I was going to be doing with my life. And I stumbled across this guy named Joseph Campbell's work when I was about 30. And that really opened up this whole new world of what understanding myth could be. I didn't really know Carl Jung's work at all. He talks a lot about myths, right? Why myths are psychological mechanisms for the ways that we manage things through our psyche, right? So myths have a lot to teach us about how the human psyche has worked over millennia. And we start to see some of the same issues coming up. And one of the primary ones that we see is this idea that a heroic person is leaves their original state of being behind. They go through a death of a kind, and they come back out of it on the other side. And it's such a popular pattern in myths that we call it the monomyth sometimes. Like, this is the myth. This is a story pattern that we see everywhere, cultures all over the world. It's not limited to any particular culture. But what we know is human beings do this, right? We talk about the death of a person and what that can mean and how that can change our lives. But there are a lot of deaths that happen. We lose jobs, we lose relationships, we lose the healthy body that we used to have, or we let go of a lot of things, and we have to find our way into our world in a new setup, in a new kind of life. And what these myths are doing for us is it's saying, okay, this is something we had to go through too, and we're going to tell you a great story to communicate how we handled it, or we handled it really badly, and please don't do this, right? But we're going to tell you a great story anyway. And we have a few examples like that in Greek mythology and in other mythic systems. So to me, it feels like this beautiful expression of love and caring from the ancestors and from the past it just makes me really see the humanity of the people that came on the earth long before I did, to say, okay, your life might have looked different. Maybe you wore different clothing or ate different food or worshiped differently or lived differently, but you still struggled with some of the same things that I struggle with. You still have relationship problems. You still have money problems. Maybe you still have challenges of many kinds that come at us. And if you kind of peel away the outside skin of those stories, human experiences don't change a whole lot. So to have this kind of shouting forward of loving advice from the past in the form of a really entertaining story is, to me, such an incredible gift. And it's really at the heart of my work and what gets me out of bed every day, to say, okay, I'm going to use this to figure out my life. I'm going to help you use it to figure out yours. And we're going to do this together because now we're allies and now we care for each other and we're going to help each other through this. So to me, I find it a really loving thing to learn from myths, to use what I bring to the table in my own work to try to explain it to other people and to help them do the same with their own trauma and their own pain, to be able to transform it into something that's beautiful. I find that to be the most sacred duty of the human life, is to recognize that even though we go through painful moments, that we have an opportunity to transform them into something more beautiful. And the places in human culture where we have captured that are really kind of the locus of where my work is like, how do we do that? How do we recognize that this is what has happened in myths? How do we do more than just survive the most terrible things that happen to us? How can we be transformed by it in a way that allows what we've learned and what we've gone through to actually help somebody else down the road? And to be able to do that, to be able to say, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. I've never been in this much pain before, but there is something beautiful that can be pulled out of that, despite all of that pain, that it can be made into something that can now go on to help somebody else navigate their path a little bit more joyfully or more successfully, so that they can go on to do the same thing again. And we keep going on and on into the future, right? I find that so beautiful and moving, and it makes meaning and it makes purpose, right, in a human life, to be able to say, it wasn't for nothing. This terrible thing that I experienced is hard and the hardest thing I've ever gone through, but I have an opportunity here to make it more than it was. And to be given that gift in the midst of so much pain is, I think, a really powerful thing. So, okay, let me give you an opportunity to ask me a question now, because I've been going on for a while. I'm so sorry. I get so excited.
Yeah, well, and it's so interesting because I hadn't really thought about it that way. I mean, what I do now is I interview people and I get their stories and I share them with others. And there's connections that are being made between people and the things that they've gone through. And like you say, the transformation that takes place when you hear someone else's story and you hear how you can make a difference and make something out of something that was so horrible, and transform it into something that helps others, that brings you fulfillment and joy in your life. And so that's what this is all about. But I did not think about the fact that we have a whole bunch of stories that have been handed down from our ancestors. And really, the only connection I have here is that when I was sitting down at my altar, somebody had told me you could connect with your aunts or your uncles. And I just somehow I had this realization that my grandmother and my aunt both lost their spouses early in their lives as well. And I thought, wow, there's a wealth of information there that I never thought about, connecting with them and finding out about their lives and how did they survive that and how did they thrive through that. And so, yeah, this taps into a whole bunch more.
I know, right? I mean, what an incredible thing it is it's not even just myths either, right? Myths are wonderful, but I really do believe that anything that has inspired you, it can be a piece of art, it can be a novel, it can be an opera, any kind of thing, those are all things that have been created by human beings that went through their own pain and processed that. And the ability of the human being to actually take something that's really difficult and transmute it into art or transmute it into something new. I mean, that is an incredible thing that human beings can do, right? As far as I know, that is all unique to the human life.
Yeah.
And that someone else could leave behind something We know stories about some of the struggles that some of our favorite artists and writers had gone through. But if I can look at a painting by Botticelli or, anyone, pick your favorite artist, it doesn't even matter. If it brings me succor, if it helps me feel joy or hopefulness or just a determination to make it through, that pain, it was not in vain. I mean, it really did help me as a human being that's down the road a ways to figure out how to navigate what I have to navigate. And we are all most, I think this is true. Most people are content with just surviving the most painful things that happen to them. But what I'm saying is we can be more, and we should try to at least. And we have our grief that we have to go through, but eventually we can get to the place where there is something that you learn that you can now share. And it doesn't have to be a great painting or a great novel or something. It can be a conversation had at the bus stop. It can be a recipe. It can be just a joke or, just any, like a hand on a shoulder. I mean, anything that's going to help the next person feel like they're not alone, to feel seen, to feel like what they've gone through is supported by other humans, like just to help you navigate that. And all of that, we have a blueprint for all of it, and it's in our myths, right? We don't need to guess what comes next because we know, right? We have these beautiful patterns that our stories show us. And when you don't know what's going to happen next, it'll tell you. And what you don't, sometimes we don't know what to do next, or we get stuck in a certain place. We get stuck in the underworld. We feel like we're still dead. We haven't brought our life back to life again. And I was in that position myself. I can share the story with you if you're interested, but I
Yeah.
had felt like I was really dead inside, and I knew that I needed to jumpstart my life again. And I used everything I've learned about mythology, and it really did work. It really did. It helped snap me into the place where I could finally start to move forward with my life and let go of that feeling. Like you can walk around and, there are dead people walking around, right? Like if you're feeling that way on the inside, and that was how I felt. I was very, very ill for a long time. I was starting to get better, but I still felt like my life was going to end at any moment. And it really had me stuck in the underworld. And to be able to use this work to figure out the path through that was such a huge blessing for me. It was a blessing to not only me, but to my family, to my children, so they can have an alive mother again, right? I mean, these things really do matter. So I know, I mean, it's worked in my life. I've seen it work in the lives of many people over the years. And I mean, that's really the purpose of what I'm trying to do, is to say, you're not alone. You have allies, you have people that want to help you. And sometimes those people aren't alive anymore. I mean, they've left behind something that's going to help you, but they're there. So, I find all of that very comforting, right? To not feel alone. I felt alone so many times in my life. And often after a death, we do feel like that because this person that was so important to us is now not in the world anymore. But, I recently lost my father. He died in 2020 on my birthday.
Hmm.
And having to navigate that absence of, and we had been losing him incrementally for several years at that point due to dementia. So a lot of who he was being lost along the way before he finally did actually pass. But knowing all of this has really helped me say, okay, how can I still talk to him. I don't know if you do with your husband, but there are
Yeah.
times that I just really need to talk to him. I tell him, I'll have conversations with him. I'll have conversations with my grandparents. I'll tell them how the boys are getting along, how my two sons are getting along. Oh, my son got accepted to his dream school. Yay, aren't we excited for it? And I found that to be really helpful. So, and we don't have to talk about all of that too much, but I hope that the sense that there is this huge, huge amount of assistance and guidance available to us through our myths, and that they follow this pattern that's very, very regular, and it shows us not only what other people have gone through, but how we can maybe navigate those steps going forward for ourselves. It can be a really useful thing to know that there's help out there.
Hmm. Yeah. So maybe tell us a little bit more about how we access that help, from these stories that you're talking about.
Well, the truth is that anybody at any time can go and read whatever myth you want, right? So you can pick up the Odyssey, say, or you can pick up the Eddas, or you can pick up any myth, and it can feel a little bit daunting at first because sometimes it feels kind of like homework, right? Like you pick this thing
Mm.
up, and maybe the language is a little archaic, or it's poetic, or it feels like something you might hear in church, right? It has some of the cadences of a hymn sometimes, and this is part of what my job is, just to say, okay, let me show you what to do, right? So I don't expect people to just pick up any myth and really know what to do with that. But what you will see is that there is this pattern that happens. We call it this monomyth, right? And the steps of it are you're in a situation where you're settled and you're relatively happy in your community. And then you're called to this heroic adventure. Someone says, you should go and do this, or you need to go and do this thing. And often that will look like maybe, that's the phone call from your doctor saying, you need to call me back because we have some news about your test results to share, right? Or your spouse saying, okay, we really need to talk. I'm not happy. We need to talk about a separation or, whatever. I mean, there are a lot of ways that our life changes in a moment. We get a phone call that we don't really want, right? And that is what we call the call to adventure or the call to the journey. And usually we have this kind of refusal of the call that happens where we say, no, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to change. I don't want anything to be different. I refuse. And, sometimes people stay in that state for 20 years. Sometimes it's just a moment of hesitation in the mind. I always tell people, if you're familiar with Harry Potter, like Hagrid comes in and he says, you're a wizard, Harry. And Harry says, I can't be a wizard. And that's his refusal of the call. And then like 2 seconds later, he's like, okay, I guess I'll go be a wizard. Like it really is. I mean, and sometimes it's 20 years later and the person's like, no, I'm not doing the thing. I'm not doing the thing. I'm not doing the thing. This is people that stay in an unhappy marriage, even though they know that it's better if the marriage ends or, refusing to go to the doctor or, any number of moments where we might say, no, I don't want to deal with this. I'm going to pretend like it's not happening.
Right.
But eventually we do get called to it and we start this journey. And what we do is we divide the journey into two spheres. So you start out on what we call the ordinary world. And that's the world that's the known world, so to speak. And then after you've accepted the call, you've accepted that you really do need to deal with this, then you're going to go into what we call the special world, which is, maybe if it is a diagnosis, maybe now you're in hospitals and you're being treated and all, you're hearing all this jargon from doctors or whatever, or, there's something different about it. And the thing that's so interesting about it is that this is where what we would call like the world of the dead or the world of the gods or the world of the fairies or whatever. And it's a place that's kind of outside of regular time. And we have to kind of navigate all of this. And when we start to look at our lives and the problems that we have in our lives through this lens a little bit, you start to see the ways in which this world really is special. And you start to see how we can turn this experience from merely survival into transformation. Survivors are usually people that continue to refuse that call. Like they're going to do the minimum amount possible. They want to keep their life the same as much as possible. But if you kind of accept this heroic role, if you pull that heroic archetype onto yourself, then not only are you going to get a lot of support for that because archetypes are big energy and they can really help you navigate it, but it also opens you up to a different kind of energetic space, for lack of a better way of putting it. I mean, it changes the way you perceive the journey that you're going through, and it allows you to start pulling these little seeds and threads of transformation toward you. And all of those things are going to build up into that thing that you're going to take with you out on the other side, right? So we talk about, there's a moment in the journey where you defeat the dragon or you confront the dragon. And if you can imagine like a dragon sitting on a horde, you're going to go in whatever that is going to mean. Maybe that's the cancer itself, or, maybe it's, it can be any number of things, right? So what is that? You're going to defeat that. And the hero always does. But then also there is this another place where we refuse. And this is what I'm particularly interested in, which is what we call the refusal of the return. So you stay in that place of grief, you stay in that place of trauma. This is where I was when I was feeling dead inside. I'd had the medical care to deal with the health condition I was dealing with. I was healthy again, but I wasn't there mentally, right? I was still feeling like a dead person walking around, and I needed something that was going to help pull me back into the regular world again, because that's what you do. It's like you come back out of it, and if you stay down in there forever, you kind of eventually become the dragon and sit on the horde yourself. So you're kind of holding all of this pain to yourself and all of this wisdom that you're gaining to yourself. You're kind of keeping it too close. And what allows us to kind of come back out of that eventually is this impulse to share it on, to like help somebody else in the end, to say, okay, I went through this and I want to try to ease the path of somebody else that might have gone through it too. So I'm ready to now stop holding onto my pain so tightly. I'm going to process it through my body and I'm going to give it on to somebody else. You start to see this. If you read the work of Campbell, he talks about this. You can learn more about this from my own work, of course, too. But what it can do is when you start to recognize what these stories are telling you metaphorically, myths are metaphors. They have to be read metaphorically. They are not about literal monsters, literal dragons, literal ogres. They are showing us something psychologically about a thing that's true about the human mind or the human psyche. So if we look at it in that way, we can see, okay, this is where I'm at now too. I'm reading the myth of Inanna, and she's going into the underworld, and she's giving up parts of herself, and then she's regaining them, and she's going through all of this. If you can kind of start to map that to your own life, you will very quickly start to see the parallels between what they have gone through in the past and what you are now going through yourself. So,
I love that. And for me, it kind of clarifies the path a little bit in another way, because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees, right? You're just in it and you don't even really know where you're at in the whole
yeah.
process. So that's really interesting, and having something to compare it to, maybe a little more tangible than just thinking about it. I like that.
And this is the advantage of actually using that word hero or heroine. And it can be a little bit tricky, right? Because people don't think of themselves as being Odysseus or Hercules or Gilgamesh or whatever. I mean, that seems like a job for people from long ago that have swords and run around in armor and do crazy things. I mean, how does that feel like something that I'm, as a, regular human woman in today's America, going to process that? But it really is about more than that. When we talk about archetypes, archetype is kind of like a prototypical idea of what a certain way of being a human being is like. So if you talk about the hero archetype, when we are scared and when we feel frail and afraid and like we can't really handle whatever it is that's coming at us in our journey, what we get to do, which is so great, is we can kind of borrow that heroic energy and kind of pull the archetype. If you imagine like kind of pulling a cloak onto yourself, like, okay, I'm afraid and I have to go into this meeting with my doctor, say, or whatever, and I don't feel prepared for this. Well, I'm going to kind of do a little guided meditation in my own mind where I'm going to say, okay, I am now going to borrow this big energy of what it means to be a hero. And I'm going to pull onto myself every hero that has ever been, every person that has done the thing that was terrifying to them and made them more scared than anything they could ever imagine, but that they went ahead and did the act anyway. If you just borrow that for a little while, it can actually help you get through this next thing that you have to do. So say you have to go into a meeting with your boss and you have to tell them something really scary and they're going to scream at you or whatever. If you understand the archetypes that we're dealing with in myths and you say, okay, I'm going to pull this onto myself, it's a big energy and it can be really powerful and useful. And then when you're done with it, you just set it aside, because if you hold on to archetypal energy for too long, it can be kind of psychologically damaging. You have to be careful how you manage that. But you can borrow it, or you can borrow, if you don't really feel like being someone's ally or helping them out, if you just kind of pull that ally archetype to yourself and say, okay, this is giving me that little bit of energy that I need in order to step into that role. And then I can put it aside myself when I'm finished with it. I don't have to be this heroic person every second of my day. I can pull every hero that's ever been onto myself. And all it really does is to give you a little bit of a shift in perception in your mind. You stand up a little bit straighter, you pull this thing into your body. So now you feel strong, you feel armored, you feel protected, you feel prepared, you feel courageous, and you go in and you do the really scary thing. And then now you can just kind of go, okay, and you release it back to the next person that needs it. And now you've done that thing and you've actually been a hero because you had that pulled onto yourself. And I do this all the time. Like if I'm ever scared, and I'm scared kind of a lot, actually, like to do this, just like I really do. I take my hands and I just go, and I stand up a little bit straighter and I say, okay, now I am, or it doesn't even have to be the hero. Like it could be any archetype. Like, okay, I am called upon now to be a visionary, and I have to step into this space and I have to see things that nobody else can see. And what a terrifying thing that is to ask of anyone, especially yourself, right? Especially when you know how stupid you can be sometimes. But if you like borrow it, you just say, okay, I'm going to take this. I'm going to be this thing that I need to be. I'm going to borrow that archetypal energy for a while. And I go in and I just absolutely rock the meeting that I'm in. And then I go away, and I don't have to be a visionary anymore. I don't have to be the most brilliant person in the room anymore. All I have to do is be the same flawed person that I was when I woke up this morning. But it allowed me to navigate that scary thing that I had to do next. And this is the beauty of archetypes, right? Is you can actually take that, pull it onto yourself for a little while. Do if the one thing you have to do is a phone call that you've been dreading to make for 6 months and you know you really need to do it, find the archetype that you need, borrow the archetypal energy for a little while, and then when you're done with it and you no longer need it, you send it and release it with gratitude. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And there's lots of times where we can get stuck in a place and really there's some little things that we can
Yeah.
subconsciously push to the side because we don't want
Right.
to deal with those. Um, and yeah, there are some big scary things in life. We are
Mhm.
afraid of a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting that this is just another tool, feels
Yeah.
like to me, to
Yeah.
help you get through some of those big things and not feel so alone in the
Mhm.
process of it all. Hmm.
Exactly. I mean, all of this has been here. I mean, this is part of Carl Jung's psychology, is this idea of archetypes and the fact that there's this kind of perfect model of any given type of human behavior. And there is a lot of energy attached to that. Like if you think about what the mother archetype is, that shows up for us a lot. Sometimes like my children, like yeah, I've recognized this. I have two teenagers. Sometimes they see the person that I am on the inside of the archetype, the flawed and changeable and vulnerable person that I am. But sometimes, especially with teenagers, they really need that mother archetype. They don't even really see me. They see this image of what the mother is, and sometimes they need to really push against that. And they need something powerful to push against so they can learn how to separate themselves psychologically from our family and so they can go off and be adults. I have a son starting college in the fall. So we're navigating this. And when I learned how to recognize when I was being seen as the mother archetype and when I was being seen as my own individual self, it helped me tremendously because, for one thing, I didn't get mad anymore when they would treat me like a mother archetype, right? Because sometimes it's a really active, energetic thing because they're pushing against something big, but sometimes they need to be enveloped by it too, right? And we have these moments where we see each other as archetypes or other people see us as archetypes all the time,
Mm.
right? So, you go out on a date and someone says, "Oh, you remind me of this person or my ex-wife or something." Well, you better tread carefully with that because whatever archetypal significance that she had for this guy before, he's going to try to mold you into that, right? So this happens a lot where like I think about the caregiver a lot. This is a problem sometimes in families is things need to be done in human life. Housework needs to be done, children need to be cared for, life needs to be run. And sometimes we have conflict around who's going to do what and all of that. So when we start to unpack that, it's not just, okay, I'm going to be the caregiver, I'm going to be the mother. It's sometimes you need to let somebody else step into that archetype that is a little bit reluctant to because they need that for their own growth. And you need to let go of the power and control that you have. So, like the mother archetype, that has a lot of control in it. And what I've had to do in my own stepping into the mother archetype is recognize when my son doesn't need that anymore. And I need to let him make his own decisions. I need to let him take control of his own life. And that's a really hard one, too, to say, okay, I have to let go of the control of that. When I think about the caregiver, I think about I could have my sons make Christmas dinner in our house. Now, it would not turn out the way it would if I did it, right?
Mhm.
But it would mean I wouldn't have to do all the work either, right? And this happens in families. Like you go home and you have a cousin that just sits on the couch the whole holiday and then just makes a plate for themselves. Well, and you're resentful about it, say. Well, maybe they need to step into that role a little bit, but you have to give up control over that, right? So just the way that we move in and out of archetypal energy in our lives all the time is an area that I'm really, really interested in right now. Like how we hold archetypes, what they are, how that changes, and what we can do about it if it's really impacting negatively our relationships is something that I find really fascinating. And this it does come from mythology as well. Like how do you recognize what they are? These are essentially characters. How are you a character for someone else? How are they a character for you? And how do you move through that successfully to try to really see each other on the other side of the archetype? So,
Yeah, beautiful. Well, that's fascinating because I was just thinking about the Mel Robbins book about the
mm,
letdown
hmm,
theory. What you're talking about is very similar. It's like,
yeah,
when do I allow someone else to just be what they need to be and
right.
me look at what I'm trying to be and to, yeah, to just recognize that is huge. That's powerful. And if you can use a story to help you with that. So Tell me more about if I was your client, what would you do with me? If I came to you with, say, this loss of grief,
Mhm.
what would we do together?
Well, the first conversations that I usually have with folks, whether they come on to workshop with me or, in a coaching situation or whatever, is just to really understand. Usually it's because people are stuck, right? I find a lot of people at the moment that they're stuck. So that's when you really want to find a way to change. You're unhappy where you are. You want to get into a better place in your life. So you might come to me to kind of help you navigate that. So what I usually do is I will identify the myths that I think are going to be the most useful. I'll tell the story of the myth, of course, and talk about what it means and how I think it applies to their situation. But then the next thing that we always do, I think that this is incredibly important, and this shows up in my book too, is I think that it's very important that we have the psyche and the soma both present in the process. So if I've already introduced a concept into your mind, I'm also going to want to pull it energetically through the body. So, and I've found since I started doing this, which is 5 or 6 years ago now, that it's very easy to say, okay, let me tell you the story of Inanna, or let me tell you the story of Eurydice and Orpheus, or, Demeter and Persephone, or whatever. If I can then, in fact, show you the myth in another way through the body. So what we do is I've set up this program that maps the yoga poses to myths themselves. So, yoga has their animals often or different symbols associated with all the poses, right? And those creatures have symbolic resonance. So if you look at one of the most basic poses in yoga is downward facing dog, right? So when you go into a downward facing dog yoga pose, it connects you to the energy of the dog. And what the dog is symbolically is a psychopomp. A psychopomp is a creature or a god that is intended to help you on your journey into the underworld. Okay, so that is your escort to the land of the dead. So the dog is going to help you do that. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Coco, but this little boy has to go down into the land of the dead, and he has a little dog that goes with him. It's one of these little Mexican hairless dogs. That dog is a psychopomp, right? So what that tells me is we're going to place that yoga pose at the entrance at which we go down, right? So we talk about things like rooster pose because that's a symbol that's associated with the sun and bright things up here. So we use a pose like that to kind of anchor us in the ordinary world. And then we use the sequence of the poses to tell the myth through the body. Okay, so we've already told the myth, it's already been introduced into your ears, and now it's in your brain. And then we're going to go into the studio and we're going to move all of that energetically through the body. And what that does is it pulls it through us. So now we have a really deep body knowing of the myth that matches our life, right? And this is when breakthroughs really start to happen. And what I love to do too is we have a lot of movement modalities. I have a retreat coming up in Spain, and it's associated around the idea of there's this beautiful word that comes out of the flamenco tradition in Spain called duende. I don't know if you know this word or not, but it's this idea that we think in the West of inspiration coming down at us from the heavens, right? Like the way a sunbeam might hit us in the head. But in the flamenco tradition of the Romani people of Spain, they have this word duende. And what it really means is we have so much pain, we have so many tears and so much blood that's pouring out of us into the earth. And what we're going to do now, though, is we're going to take all of that flow of energy from our blood, sweat, and tears that's going down into the earth, and we're going to pull it back up through our bodies. And it's going to come out through the steps of the flamenco dancer, or through the guitar, or through the voice that sings. And what they're really saying is this is the thing that's going to change pain into beauty. We recognize that this is a thing that we can do. We're going to transmute that pain. We're going to take, I mean, the Romani people, they have been through so much over the centuries, right? They're persecuted by just about everyone, every place they've ever been. And they take all of that rejection and all of that abuse that they've experienced. And if you've ever seen a flamenco performance, like I went to see one in Madrid a few years ago with my husband. I thought it was going to be kind of cheesy, like for tourists, and it was just like on a flagpole or something, like on a light post somewhere. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be dumb. It's going to be stupid for tourists. And we sat down in the restaurant, and I said, okay, if I start crying within 30 seconds, you'll know it's the real deal. And they started dancing. It's like instant. Yeah, it's like
Oh,
so powerful, like these dancers. But it's not just for flamenco dancers. Like this is a concept that is for anyone, like any artist or anyone really, to recognize that it's not just coming down from the heavens, that it's through us and then back up through the body. So if you take that idea, you can say, okay, I'm processing this death of my partner or my father, whoever it is that you've lost, if you're dealing with grief, this person is gone from you now in a kind of a way. But all of those things that you're feeling, all of that pain, all of that loss, all of that grief, we are going to transmute that into something that is now new. And this is what I've been talking about this entire conversation. It's perfectly captured in this word duende, to say, okay, I'm going to try to take that and transform it into something that's joyful, even if there's pain mixed in the middle of it. Because if you can find a purpose in any kind of agony that you've ever gone through, I mean, this is what's at the heart of, oh, what is that book? Frankel's book, from the concentration camp, right? Like
Oh,
he was,
yes. Yeah.
you know the one I mean. I'm losing the
Yeah.
title right now. Yeah. Anyway, so that's really like this is what we do with it. Human life is so incredibly difficult. There are so many moments. Our hearts are broken. Our bodies are broken. I mean, it's not an easy thing to navigate this life. I don't care how successful you are, how rich you are, how anything you are. It's going to come to your life because this is what human life is. But the perfect little jewel that's at the center of all of that is this opportunity that we have if we find our courage and if we find our way to move through this mythically, that we have this opportunity to pick up this beautiful treasure on the other side of it and benefit not only our own selves, which we will be doing, but anybody else that comes after us that needs that. I mean, to me, like, how amazing is that? It's like the one thing that makes everything that we go through in a human life beautiful and meaningful and even tolerable, right? That we
Right.
get to do this. So that's
Yeah.
really it.
I love it. So what's the best way for people to find you?
Well, my website is mythicstories.com, and they are more than welcome. I've got some classes that are coming online in the next few days. So I talked about archetypes a little bit, and I have some ways to kind of engage with understanding what archetypes are influencing you. It's coming out as a deck very soon. So it's a set of decks, of archetype decks around like love and romance, relationships of that type, family and friends, those kind of relationships, and also work relationships, and then a series of questions that you can ask to try to figure out what archetypes are influencing you in different parts of your life, and also how to change that if that's what you need to do. So that's coming online soon. And
Oh,
there's just more information about my work. Obviously, we can't cover everything in just a little 40-minute conversation. But yeah, so I would encourage anyone, if you're curious about this, the first and fastest thing you can do is just sign up to spend 30 minutes talking to me. It's for free. Happy to talk to you and guide you on whatever your specific situation is to try to help. And I will give you as many tools as I can in 30 minutes to help you navigate whatever it is that you are personally going through. So if you're listening and that interests you, please just go to mythicstories.com and sign up.
awesome. Yeah, I encourage people to do that. Why not?
Why not? Exactly.
Try it out. Yeah. And it sounds like what's up and coming here is going to be really profound. I hadn't heard about that. And so it sounds exciting. Good for you.
Well, I mean, all I do all day is try to find more ways for this work to be helpful to other people. This is how I transmute my pain and trauma into something that's beautiful for someone else. So I like to live it the way I talk about it, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any parting words or advice that you want to share before we go?
Well, I would just say to everyone, if I can tell you one thing, is that you are not alone, and there are people for generations before you that care about you and want to help. And I am on that list, absolutely. So, if you feel alone, know that you are not, and I am here to help you find your way forward.
Beautiful. Thank you again for taking the time to do this. It's been very special. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for listening, and bye for now.